Hello, my name is Gary Mansfield, and this is the Ministry of Arts podcast, where each week I'll be speaking to a different artist. Now let's begin by bagging these bongos.
Yeah, right. Crazy.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ministry of Arts podcast. Just before I take you to meet this week's guest, I want to tell you about a few ways you can help support the podcast if that's something you're able to do. There's a few ways, and they're all over at the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile, where you'll find a Linktree drop-down box. You can either become a Patreon, where you can support the podcast on a monthly basis. You can buy us a coffee, which is pretty much what it says, just give a one-off donation there. Or there is the merch shop, which has just opened, where you can get t-shirts, hoodies and tote bags. 100% of what we receive goes back into the podcast to help it grow. And if not, that's absolutely fine. You could always just at least give a little shout out on the socials for us. That said, there's a little bit of good news on the arty calendar. One of my favourite art happenings is back open this weekend, which is the Art Car Boot Fair. It's this Saturday over at King's Cross. If you want to find more information, just go over to the Art Car Boot Fair's Instagram profile, where you'll find all the info there. Well, finally, today's guest is Mr. Lee Wagstaff. I've been aware of Lee's work for quite some time. He had a great exhibition down at Jealous Gallery a couple of years ago, which I was lucky enough to walk into just as they was hanging it. And this episode was recorded some time ago. This one in particular was recorded on a bench outside the Cliffs Pavilion Theatre in Essex, overlooking the Thames estuary. So please come and join me as I spoke to Lee Wagstaff. So how often do you come over to the UK?
3 or 4 times a year I try and come. Sometimes a little bit more, but I had a dog in Berlin for quite a while, and it's a bit trickier when you go, and he died a couple of years ago, which broke my heart. Little monkey, I miss him. But since then I can kind of come a bit more often, and now that I've given up my studio there, I can come as often as I like, because I'm building a studio now in Italy, and when I'm not there, I'm not there. So eventually I will probably be full-time in Italy by the end of the year, I hope. But
so you're from round here, Southend-on-Sea. It is what it is, normal British seaside town. How did you end up in Berlin?
Well, it's just really like almost everything that's happened in my life has kind of been, during my adult life, has really been to escape. Not to escape from something, but just to escape somewhere more interesting, or to do to do what I want to do.
Is there anything more interesting than Southend-on-Sea?
Well, when you live there for 20 years, then it kind of get. But also, it has got a lot better here if you want to do stuff. Like before, it was a bit. There wasn't really much going on, and you could always go to London, but then London has kind of got its own problems as well. But Southend, I didn't mind living here, but I like to study, and I like to learn stuff, but I don't really like being in institutions. Yeah. I don't like being in colleges. I make friends there and I can get on with it, but I really prefer to study on my own and learn my own way. And I'm really not very good with authority. I'm not against it, but I'm just not interested in playing those games. Yeah. And from quite an early age, I learned that, and I think I was quite a precocious kid. And people, every now and then I will kind of say what I think is the truth to a teacher. Even at school I would say, well, you're really not a very good teacher and you don't understand your subject and you're wasting my time. And for a 12-year-old to say that to a teacher is quite precocious.
It's
and
quite a line to draw.
One teacher screamed at me. She said, how could you be so rude? And I said, well, I don't mean to be rude, but this is my time, this is my life. And I've always had that attitude. I've done millions of crappy jobs, and half the jobs you do, you're either trying not to work, or you do the work really quickly and get it over with, and then you can DOS the rest of the time, or read, or do something more interesting. But that's kind of why I probably still do art is because I'm in control and I can do whatever I want when I want. And I love working. I work like all the time. I'm never not working on my art. But when you do that for someone else in some crappy job, or a job that is unfulfilling, like even what I did when I was at college, I did road sweeping. And I actually really liked that job because there was a reason to do it. The road was filthy. Yeah. I cleaned it, and then it was clean again for a little while, and then I got paid. And I really enjoyed that. People completely leave you alone. So that's how I paid most of my way through college, because I was eligible for a grant, but my dad wouldn't fill in the forms because it's none of their effing business what he does and how much he earns. So I more or less put myself through college. Obviously, like family and stuff helped as well. And what was really interesting is most other people at college didn't know that I was a road sweeper. And you're invisible when you've got that uniform on. You're completely invisible.
And
the only people that talk to you are local drug addicts, prostitutes, and the people who are the kind of underbelly of London. Everyone else, you are invisible. Where is Big Ben? That kind of thing. And I really loved that job, and it was, and again, like all the people who worked there just were trying to hide all the time and DOS. But I thought it was quite an easy job anyway. You just sweep the street, you clean it up, and it looks nice. Then you go and have your break, and it used to go really quickly. And I actually quite liked that job. Yeah. So I'm not against work, but I'm against giving up my mind and my physical well-being for some crappy job where I get bad money and my life is over after 20 years. Because I saw my dad do that. Yeah. My dad gave his physical being. He was a carpet fitter until his knees went. Then he was a taxi driver, and he did everything to support 4 kids. And I knew from a young age that I definitely wasn't going to do that. I never wanted an easy life.
You could probably see that your dad didn't want to do that to some extent.
And eventually, like later on in his life, he did kind of escape the grind, but it meant leaving the family and his wife and stuff. And he went off to the countryside because he really wanted to be like a bit of a gamekeeper.
Good on him.
Because he trained gun dogs, which was a really strange thing. Like I grew up in a terrace house in Southend, and our garden was like a blooming zoo. We had chickens, pheasants, all these kind of things, and our neighbours thought we were crazy.
Brilliant.
But school kids thought we were great. They could come round and they could see pheasants in our garden, because my dad was breeding pheasants. The chickens were sitting on the eggs, and then him and his friend, they had this kind of place they could release them in the countryside.
Chickens were sitting on the pheasant eggs?
They're called bantams. So you get the pheasant's eggs. I don't know where he got them from, but then the bantams sit on them. They hatch them, and then when the pheasants are a little bit bigger, they get released into a kind of pen where they're semi thing, and then eventually, like the local gentry or whatever will go and shoot them. Obviously, some of them survive. That's why there are pheasants all around England, because they're not from England.
Yeah.
And so he had some really bizarre hobbies and ambitions, but they were kind of normal. So I went to like one of the roughest schools, like Cecil Jones, and we had 3 shotguns on our wall in the terrace house. You could see them through the window. Obviously, you can't do that now. And they only had like a little lock through them. So I grew up around guns and hunting dogs, and also, like, when you do train gun dogs, you're kind of at the service of very, very, very posh people, very rich people. So we would go, like, as kids, we would go and stay there. And to be honest, they were always really nice to us, because we were kind of like the helps. Because weirdly enough, it's a really niche thing, training gun dogs. It's a really niche skill to have. And my dad was really good at it. And I think that's what he really wanted to do with his life. But if you've got 4 kids, you can't really do that. But it was kind of quite a strange childhood. So a bit like art, I've always been around like really lower class people and really upper class people, and it's the people in the middle that I usually have the most conflict and problems with.
Yeah.
But which I think is the same for most lower class and upper class. There's a kind of understanding, a weird understanding, but it's just the middle class which is what you encounter all the way through art school. Is sometimes the most, for me, really problematic. I have quite a chip on my shoulder in a certain way. I mean, in some ways I don't care, but I realised that after I left college that there's a kind of a lot of indoctrination that goes on into certain kind of values, which can often be very contradictory.
How would you explain what you do to someone that doesn't know your work?
So I mostly work in oils, and the work I've been doing for the last few years, it's kind of a bit of everything. It's like a synthesis of abstraction and figurative, but in one sentence is complex or not complex geometric patterns are kind of painted, and within those patterns there's usually something hidden subliminally, or sometimes it's quite obvious. It's usually a face, so it's quite obvious that there's a face there, or sometimes there's a hint of a face. And for me, there's still a kind of kick out of doing this and trying to make it as subtle as possible. And quite often they fail, like you can't see them, so I have to start again.
I mean, it does look like that there is a slight image of a person standing behind a simple or complex geometric shape. And then when you look closer, you discover that it isn't behind, it's part of the same, and
yeah, the pattern the pattern somehow creates a half tone. So it's a manipulation of the pattern. So instead of using, like normally a half tone is dots or crosses, or in any photo editing program, they're usually quite set shapes, like a dot or an oval or a square or something. But so I tried to work out a way of using other shapes. First of all, other shapes, and then I thought, well, you can basically use anything that is completely monochrome. So it has to be, to create the illusion of depth and tone, the original image can't have that in it.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of contradictory thing. So that's kind of what I play with, and sometimes I do purely abstract geometric stuff, and people say, "Oh, I can't see anything in it," and I say, "Well, there's not anything in it." But that is the thing that is kind of most interesting for me at the moment to push. But I'm always trying to simplify it, but it doesn't really work out like this. I'd probably call myself like a maximalist who wants to be a minimalist but can't quite decide. But yeah. So.
Well, I first saw it in Jealous. You had the whole of Jealous.
So the first show that I did there, yeah, it was about a year before lockdown. I mean, I've done some prints with them recently, but the actual show I did with them, no, because we just drove over.
Well,
there was no restriction.
Lockdown, yeah. So I saw your first show just before lockdown, year or so before lockdown. Blown away, loved it, and I think I messaged you that day.
Yeah. I know, I love Jealous. I was in there the other day. It's like, I've worked with lots of different galleries and spaces over the years, but it's never been easier than it is with Jealous. You don't sign with Jealous, you just kind of get to know them a little bit, and if you've got an idea, then you can go and talk to Dario about it, and if he thinks it's interesting, then it might happen. And so it's really easy, and also I would just be happy just to visit Jealous. It's really nice to go to the print rooms. Everyone in there really seems to get on with it, enjoys it. It's a kind of family, you know. It's just easy there. The people who work in the reception.
They do just take care of you,
yeah,
don't they?
But I think they take care of each
working
other.
with them or just a guest.
I think they take care of each other, and I think that's the reason why it's easy. There's no pretension there. You know, a lot of it is, because it's a printmaking studio, it's about skill and technique, which is what I'm into. It's really inviting for people to go and see exhibitions there. Like, people are nervous. There's still this kind of weird thing about going into a gallery, but the doors are open and there's always a friendly welcome, and I think they have really interesting artists that pass through. And
I saw your show there, I didn't even realise it was oils. I figured it was just created on a computer and then screen printed.
I kind of like the contradiction and the how does he do that? And obviously, like, I'm never going to tell people how I do it, because if I did, then everyone could do it. But you know, there's lots of traditional elements in what I do, and it's not as complicated as you would think it is. But yeah, and I've spent like years and years trying to work out how to do this, and each picture from start to finish probably takes like 6 weeks to 8 weeks to do. So it's not an easy, fast process. But yeah, and I do start off with computers. Like, most of the imagery is 100% created or kind of edited in a computer. So I start off with an original image. It's not like and every single mark is already decided before any paint comes out, because and whenever I have tried to be expressive or something like that, it's kind of okay, but it feels a bit fake to me, because I'm not an expressive person like that. And I've tried it, and it kind of looks okay. It looks like art, but it's not how I think. And you know, having listened to lots of your podcasts on how people work, the whole creative process is really in my head before it starts, and then it's finished on the screen. But you know, I kind of know how to do that quite easily. But it's really like all the hard work is in the head.
Well, that's the best place for it to be, isn't it? No one else can copy it from there.
No, and also I'm not really that bothered about copying. I didn't invent any of this, and everything that I do kind of stems from a tradition, because that's the kind of artist I am. I really enjoy looking at art and having like dialogues with art history and all kinds of things like that. So, you know, it's not really, to me, it's not about huge steps of innovation. It's just like innovation for me to go from this place to this place. It's like a big shift for me to work in this way or to do that. And I think that's, to me, that's the most interesting art to see, that something that is kind of steeped in tradition, but it's kind of been stretched or warped or kind of built upon.
So you started life in Southend. You had shotguns, animals, and
alive and frozen.
Yeah. And in semi-states of training as well. Was there any creativity in the home growing up?
Not in that sense of kind of art or poetry or anything like that. So there are 4 children, but when there are 4 kids, like this was before the internet and when there was only 3 TV channels, and so parents have to work quite hard to contain 4 children.
Of course.
This is in the age of additives and sweets and all that kind of stuff. We always had like quite a lot of books. They weren't good books. They were just like books you get from the bookshop. But I was saying this to my mum the other day, I really appreciate that you read to us all the time, because you know, I think that's what makes precocious kids, if they have a big vocabulary and they like reading.
Yeah.
But I really believe that education is the thing that frees you from, to a certain extent, from your class, from your background, or gives you at least the keys to do that. But also lots of paper and pencils. And when young kids you can kind of entertain with that, but obviously as the kids got older, I was the only one that was still playing with the pencils and the paper. And it was that, you know, that sugar paper, you know, that really cheap paper, which I still love to this day, you know, different colours. And once I got coloured pencils, that was just it. Funnily enough, Southend Library used to have a kind of little art gallery in it. I think that was probably my first introduction to art, but not really the art world. And Southend Library, I think, is the thing that made me, because, you know, when everyone else, especially as a teenager, when everyone else was going out and doing stuff, I was at Southend Library, and it used to be a really good library then. Now it's part of Southend University, and all the good books are up in the university section. And so it's mostly about people going online there. But they had brilliant art books in there, and I used to spend all my free time in there, and I learned so much about art. Even the art I really didn't like, I thought, oh, I have to understand why they did this and all that kind of stuff. So
was you a bit of a solitary kid?
Yeah, I think I was solitary in some ways, although I really like sport. And to do sport, you kind of have to be around people, especially running. But then the running that I ended up liking best was long distance running, where you're trying to be away from people as much as possible.
Yeah, you're on your own in a group.
Yeah, so you know, I like exercise and sports and things, but yeah, probably running away from people. I mean, I think I can get on with people, but I think in general I would rather just avoid it. And it's not that I don't really like people, it's just I don't know. I used to think it was that I was shy, but I'm pretty sure I'm not shy, because I've done talks before, like to 200 people, and I don't get nervous or anything about that. I think it's just like I would rather avoid conflict.
Yeah, but giving a talk isn't conversing or anything. It's your voice, isn't it? You alone.
Yeah, but when I did all the tattoo stuff, they were like, people were really hard on me. They wanted to ask a lot of really difficult questions. So I knew all that was coming. It wasn't just like, oh, I paint like this and I do this aquatint. It's like, you know, why are you covered in swastikas, and do you know about this? And I used to expect a lot of abuse, but most of the time it didn't come, but there would always be 1 or 2 people who really want to trip you up.
Well, I can't let that pass. Who's covered in swastikas?
When I was at the Royal College, I did an MA in printmaking,
Okay.
and my MA project was I was tattooed.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you didn't know
No,
that?
I didn't.
Okay, so
Good.
or maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should just let people think that. Yeah, because every now and then it comes up again on the internet. There are a lot. I did. So I spent 4.5 years getting tattooed with lots of geometric shapes and patterns, which include patterns that have swastikas in them.
Got you.
So this is like a Japanese pattern, and it was supposed to be reference to my cultural background and the universality of symbol and shapes and things. And I think I was probably a bit naive in the reaction. And if I had done that now, I would be like completely.
What year are we talking?
So I graduated in 2000. So this was just at the beginning of the internet being so big. So I graduated. I got really a lot of press and stuff for this because I exhibited myself in the degree show.
Yeah.
On the opening, I had to have a security guard. I had to have. It was in all the newspapers and stuff like that, and it was in general fairly positive. But as times have changed, like every now and then, someone on the internet will discover, quote unquote, discover me and how I used to work, or there'll be a picture of mine in some compilation book that comes out, and then it's not usually too bad because most people are educated and they understand the context of what I did and stuff. But then there are some people who are badly educated by certain ideas, and they just immediately jump on. If it's something that they've seen somewhere is bad, then they will kind of tell me. Like, people are not shy about coming forward and telling me what's in my head and why I did this and what it means. Yeah. And I just ignore those people.
But if you used to see someone with a swastika tattoo, there is no context. It is just a man with a swastika tattoo.
Yeah, but there's a really long tradition of that in tattooing. Like before tattooing was like it is now, I can tell you like 30, 40, 50 people who've got lots and lots of swastikas all over them, and none of them are right-wing or Nazis. Most of them have a bigger and better understanding of culture and symbols and history than the average person who thinks they're really well educated. So every now and then that will come up, and whenever I do anything like this where I kind of step back into the talking directly to an audience, things come back again, and usually it's kind of okay, but every now and then, and yeah, I don't know, it's just part and parcel. But for me it's like a lifetime ago, but obviously my body is still the same. I still have that thing. I don't regret any of those things. I wouldn't change it, and it's part of what made me who I am. But obviously I also don't walk along the street in a swimming costume, and I don't go out in public in a swimming costume. It's not that I'm ashamed of it, it's just I don't really like. I'm from a seaside town, so of course I don't go to the beach.
If you are seen with, I don't know how visible they are because you've got a coat on this morning. If you've got a t-shirt on, for instance, and they're visible.
Well, I don't wear t-shirts very much because I really don't like the sun on my skin. But first of all, I don't really care what anyone thinks of me. Obviously, I try and avoid physical conflict, but that doesn't really happen.
Oh yeah, but you're aware that there is no nastiness attached to them, but other people would.
Well, it's more patterns. What I have is more patterns. So you would have to really look quite hard, and then you'd realise that that could be a swastika shape. And what I have is mostly patterns, which is probably still plays into what I do now. It's just more patterns, like being manipulated in a certain way.
So if I look closely, I can see you behind the patterns on your body.
Well, I think a few tattooists have tattooed some of those pictures that I've done. I get people write to me saying, "Oh, can I tattoo it?" And I said, "Yeah, as long as you send me a picture, because I want to see what it looks like when they've done it." But no, I have lots of other patterns. I have cross patterns, I have line patterns, but that was the thing. And I think if people go back and they look, I have got a big swastika on my chest, but again, I've talked about this endlessly, so I don't really talk about it anymore, because I think if people are genuinely interested why I've got this, there's enough online. Any intentions I have in my mind, that's something I have to live with, and I know who I am, I know what I did, and I know the reason for doing it, and if other people interpret it in another way, I can't stop that. This probably goes into your next question about how did I get into art.
Then you ask yourself the question and answer it.
So originally when I left school, I was really into science, not art at all. I don't know if I ever wanted to be an artist. and I was really into science. And the reason I was into science, especially at school, is I really liked drawing the diagrams. So we would do an experiment in chemistry, biology, and physics, and the information is just information. It's kind of interesting, but for me the interesting part was drawing the experiment, and especially if the experiment went wrong and the glass smashed or something like that. And I would love drawing that, and I would do the homework, the basic things like in 10 minutes, but the actual drawing of the experiment, I would spend like hours on that, like drawing reflections in the glass, and if there was a bit of oil, drawing the rainbow color in the oil. Yeah. And so again, I think I was kind of bored at school, and I felt I was really understimulated, and I probably can blame my mum for that, because I was kind of quite well read before I went to school, and my mum wasn't well read. She left school at 14, like most people in those times, in the 40s and 50s. So she wasn't from a highly educated background, but I think she just enjoyed reading to us as kids. But most parents want their kids to speak a bit better, to read a bit better. Yeah. I really wanted to be a scientist. I really wanted to be a botanist. And I went to the local tech college, which I don't think is there anymore, which is luckily next to the library, so I could run away from there. So I left after a few months. I just couldn't hack it. I didn't like being there. I'd kind of like dropped out of tech college, but I obviously knew that I needed more education. So what I ended up doing instead was going to evening classes.
What were the evening classes?
So I did this over about 3 or 4 years, and I kind of collected A-levels. I did sociology, psychology, philosophy, and then I met some friends who were also into art, so I started doing the art subjects. So then I did art, printmaking, and photography. I've got 7 altogether. I can't remember what was the 7th one. Oh, something like film studies. So I've got 7 A-levels. And when you've got 7 A-levels, you can apply for university. You only really need 3. Yeah. But I had 7 A-levels. So I thought, all my friends, they were all going to art college now. There was this couple, like a husband and wife, and they ran the fashion course in Southend, and they were really good at getting people into universities. So eventually I went to St Martin's. Not particularly because I wanted to go to St Martin's, but lots of the fashion people were going there. So I thought, I'll apply there as well. And I really wanted to do photography, and they called me up, or they wrote to me and said, we don't do a degree in photography. I said, well, what else do you do then? And they said painting, sculpture, printmaking. And I thought, I've got an A-level, I've got a grade A-level in printmaking, put me down for that. So like really kind of nonchalant, like not like really nervous or excited or anything about that. I just thought, maybe it's time. How did we get to this? So eventually, the reason I ended up being an artist was because I could be. And that might sound a little bit like I've spoken to friends about that I was going to do this podcast, and they said, don't tell that story. You come across as a really entitled kind of because they say, you really have to have a passion for art. It must be an uncontrollable passion. But my view of passion is it's a kind of incontinence. Like I believe you can have a passion for a lover, or you can have a passion for a chocolate cake, like an uncontrollable desire. But when I make art, everything I do about it is really controlled. It's really like to the last dot is kind of worked out, and I'm not passionate about art. It's just something that I do that gives me like it's immensely interesting for me to do. And I guess some people generally do have a passion for art, but I would say mine is more of a drive than a passion.
Yeah. Well, what piece that you've created has got the strongest emotional connection?
Again, I've been thinking quite a lot about this, and there's not really a single piece. And the reason I'm here in England at the moment is I bought a picture for the Royal Academy. And I enter into this quite a lot because I've spent a bit of time there. I know some people who work there, and I try and enter like every couple of years. And most of the time I've got in, but I never take it for granted that I get in. But if I do get in, then I usually take my mum to the preview days, and it's a kind of tradition that we go there, and I go into the room where my piece is, and I say to my mum, can you find my piece in it? And my mum, she's not really a huge fan of my work. She usually say, I bet it's that one, isn't it? It's not like, Lee, my talented, amazing son, I bet it's this beautiful piece here. Usually it's like, it's that weird thing, isn't it? And I don't know if you've seen Have you seen the porcupine thing that I made? It's like a life-size mannequin of me, and I'm kind of crouching down, hiding, and I have porcupine quills. And when we went there that year, I was quite excited because I knew that she was going to guess it quite quickly because it's wearing my clothes. So obviously she's seen those clothes before, quite scruffy. And she said, I bet it's that piece. So I have a kind of sentimental attachment to that just because I knew that it would make me laugh, my mum's reaction to that piece. Couldn't really understand why I'd made the hedgehog thing, but I got really good reaction from that. And funnily enough, your friend Annika Rice tweeted about it.
Oh wow!
And I hadn't really been in her sphere since I was a kid and saw her on school. But she said something about she really liked this piece. And my mum was more excited that Annika Rice liked the piece than the actual piece. So she's a typical she's impressed that a celebrity that she's heard of has heard of me. She gets more excited by it if I tell her that someone I know who might be a celebrity is interested. Like when I graduated, Bowie bought quite a lot of my work.
Yeah, I heard
and
that.
So she's not a big fan of Bowie, but she was quite excited about that. She could understand that because that gave it value to her, that a person who had kind of like some kind of kudos or valued what I did. So,
and you got a quote from him as well, didn't you?
Yeah, and I like that quote because it's quite verbose.
And what is the quote?
I can't remember. It's something about me being spiritually arrogant or something like that, but also it's quite a thoughtful quote, and no one can take that away from me. If you've got a quote from David Bowie, it has some kind of cultural currency, and also it's a really nice quote. And I really wish that at the time I'd kind of made a bit more effort to contact him. It was kind of the beginning of the internet, so I knew the forums that he was hanging out with, because he used to hang out in the art forum, the art kind of chat rooms of certain things. But I just thought, well, what am I going to say to him? Oh, please be my friend. Because he did end up being friends with a lot of the YBAs and artists that he met around that time. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's better. There was just one interaction, and he had the work, and it existed in his mind, and it was just quite a nice thing. Because when I graduated from the RCA, that was all I ever really wanted to do, was to finish one project in a way that I'd imagined it. And even then I thought of not necessarily giving up art, but I just thought that's all I ever really wanted to do, is to do one project as a whole, which kind of took me 5 years, and realize it in a way that I really wanted to. And it took me years and years to kind of get back in the groove of being an artist.
Nice.
And now it kind of interests me even more, and like these days it's quite good to me. And I thought about that thing you have about how many percent it is, like for your badges.
3 and 97.
3 and 97, and I thought, well, I've kind of always been on the
for anyone that's is confused by what you've just mentioned there, right. So it's said at art school that some teachers do say that only 3% of artists make a living from being an artist. I said that I was quite happy being one of the 97 percenters.
Yeah, and I'd also got used to that. Like people, especially if they go to university, they expect to make a living from whatever they've studied from, and you just can't guarantee that in art. It doesn't, unless you are a very niche, very skilled, kind of certain kind of artist, but then you're really constrained by that. There are quite a few amazing professional portrait artists that always get commissioned, but they have to work within a certain way. But I always wanted to do what I wanted when I wanted, and I've always been really uncompromising about what I did. And it just so happens that what I do now people are quite into, but I had a lot of lean years. And like I said before, I'm not going to give my body and my mind over to doing some really laborious kind of soul-destroying job. And I had like a lot of success at the beginning of my career. Like when I graduated, I had an agent and I made giant photographs, and he sold those to a lot of rich people all around Europe. And then after that, it just kind of just dried up because I wasn't very good at producing work. And that's one of the things I think artists, they don't have to decide. You don't have to decide anything. But if you want this to be your career, you have to study what a career is.
Yeah. Well, we were speaking of other artists earlier. If there was you and 5 other artists, past and present, what would your ideal group show be?
Well, I've been looking forward to this question because I'm really, really going to show off here now. Because the first ever group show that I was in was a few months after I graduated. So I graduated in June 2000, and I was in a group show at Foundation Beyeler in Switzerland, which is a huge museum in Switzerland. This was in the autumn afterwards, and it was a exhibition called Ornament Und Abstraction, meaning ornament and abstraction, and it was about the relationship between pattern and in primitive cultures and abstract art in contemporary art. And in that exhibition was Picasso, Jackson Pollock, Henri Matisse. It was Cara Walker's first international show. Kandinsky, Gustav Klimt, Lee Wagstaff, Shirin Neshat, Solowitz, I think Rothko. So after that...
Right, now you're fucking shoving off.
Exactly. But I mean, can you imagine? But this was when I was... and in this exhibition, they had one giant photograph, like the top of my head tattooed. And I also had to do the performance, which... Because when I graduated, I did this kind of... It was really a non-performance because I don't do anything. I just stand on a rotating platform.
Yeah.
And you can see the tattoos, and I'm wearing a kind of loincloth. You know, to think about it now, I could never in a million years do that now. But there was something inside me that thought that this is the best way to communicate this project. And then it just kind of roller coasted. And then when I got this agent, he was kind of getting me all these gigs and exhibitions. And then somehow I was in this exhibition. I think they kind of thought it fitted in quite well. And I was of that very slim moment in 2000. So I was kind of just after the YBAs. And I think everyone was looking for the next YBAs, which didn't really happen. I think the YBAs just carried on.
Yeah,
like no one really... but at that time, I think curators were looking for something a little bit edgy or controversial. And so I was in this. And I can, if I close my eyes now, I can still see, as I'm turning around, the Matisse there, the Picasso there. And I had to do this, I think, 3 times a day to the audience of kind of dignitaries and things, and then I had to go back a week or 2 later and do it again, and it was during Art Basel, so it was really busy at that time, and they put me up in this really fancy hotel called the Three Kings. You know, I'm from Southend, and I was kind of like in too deep too quickly, and I didn't really know what I was doing. Like any normal person would have somehow tried to network with these people, but I thought, well, what are we going to talk about? And you know, they could have set up their careers, but every time, and I think of all the people that I've met in the past, and then I realized, oh, I was with that person, and oh, they offered me a show, but my agent said, oh, that's probably not the best place for you. And I would think about all these things during my lean years when I was really...
Of course.
I wasn't starving, but like when I was thinking, well, I make art, sometimes people buy it, how can I just make one more person a month buy my art, and then everything will be fine. You know, now things are quite good.
Well, the grass is a little greener now, isn't it?
And now I have to think of a way to kind of maintain that, but not in an artificial way. When the COVID thing happened, I had a fairly substantial following, partly because there was the Bowie auction, and during the Bowie auction, my pieces were in that. So I got another lease of...
What did they go for then, do you know?
The blood... So he bought this blood piece that I made. So I made a kind of Turin Shroud style piece of me printed in my own blood, which I forgot
I do know that.
Okay, so that was a piece that I made 2 of those for my graduation. Bowie bought one and the V&A bought the other. So
it's not bad.
It's not bad, because that's when I realized, that's when I really thought, oh, I can finish now. When that happened, I got a huge bump in my followers. That's the weird thing about Instagram. Like, someone can share something you've done, and then you look the other day and you think...
It's not a real world, is it? That's the thing.
Well, it kind of is in a way.
There's no rhyme or reason to what happens on there.
But some people are very influential on there, and it was quite organic, the growth I had on there. Like, I never really tried, or and what can be quite nice is some of these aggregator sites that kind of share certain kinds of work. They have really big followings, and when the Bowie thing happens, I got a big bump. And then there's another site called High Fructose, which is into lots of very graphic art, and I got a huge bump again after that, and it seems to be quite steady now. But I think finally, now that I'm in the woods, in Italy, in the mountain, I've started to learn about coppicing. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
So I'm learning about that and learning how to look after the forest, and then learning about plants. So finally, I think I'm going to be a botanist.
There you go.
So finally, it's kind of come full circle.
So you've turned into your dad.
Yeah, and
moving away to the country,
to the countryside,
to
do what I want to do,
Superb.
to make as much noise as I want to make, but also still be an artist, so I can have the best of both worlds. So I imagine I'll be making more things out of wood somehow. I think this was what I was always meant to do, was to work with plants and animals and things. And I mean, the nearest neighbour is about 10-minute walk away, and the nearest village is about 40 minutes away. So there's not really a bus. There's a bus kind of nearby, but maybe half an hour away. And by the time you've got to there, you kind of walked halfway down, to the village. But I really love it there. Italian people are kind of so friendly, and they're just not bothered by most things.
And what have you got coming up? Summer show?
Well, fingers crossed. I mean, I put the work in, but well, maybe I think you find out in a couple of weeks whether you've been in it, because it's a real lottery thing, and you really have to catch the eye of someone that wants to hang your work in the room. And a few times I've gone and collected one, it said accepted but not hung. That is even worse.
Yeah.
To me, I'd rather be rejected.
A portrait of me got put in, was accepted.
Yeah.
But not hung.
Was it quite a large picture?
No, it was only A2, I think.
Because there are, over the years I've kind of learnt some of the secrets.
It wasn't by me. It was by someone else.
Was it by Ray? No.
No.
Okay.
It was by Wilfred Wood.
Okay. I don't know his work, but Ray I knew a little bit from St Martin's and from the Royal College. He came in a few times because Mark Hampson was at the Royal College, so he's friends with Ray and stuff. It's really a strange one, the Royal Academy, because you really don't know, unless what you do is exactly on the mark of the theme. But the theme this year, I'm not even sure. It's quite ambiguous.
Isn't it to do with change or something?
Yeah, maybe it's something like, or exchange or something like that. Maybe that. And I just published Jealous have just published a set of prints of mine. They've taken them a few times to different fairs, but so that's really the main thing. But I don't really think I have much else coming up. But
for anyone to find your work, where would they find it, be it website or social media?
Well, I've mentioned Instagram.
And what is your handle on there?
It's Lee_Wagstaff.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ministry of Arts podcast. It's a podcast that's produced with the help of the listener. And if you like what you've heard and you think you might be able to give a little support, there's two ways in which you can do it. If you go over to the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile, you'll find a Linktree drop-down box. And in that box, you'll find two links. One is called Buy Us a Coffee, and it's pretty much that. You can make a one-off payment, the price of a cup of coffee. Or, if you're able and want to do it more long-term, you can become a Ministry of Arts Patreon, where you can sign up to support us on a monthly basis. And 100% of your support goes back into the podcast. And if you're not able to do that, that's absolutely fine. This content is free for everyone. But we would urge you to follow us on your socials and show us a bit of love that way. Either way, thanks for listening and see you next time. Ta-da.